This is the royal scandal that refuses to be buried. The disgrace that keeps resurfacing no matter how hard the palace tries to sweep it under the crimson carpets of Buckingham. And this time, it's darker, deeper, and even more disturbing than before. We are now staring directly into the murky underbelly of Prince Andrew's globe-trotting days, the ones that were supposedly dedicated to promoting Britain's economic interests. But make no mistake, these weren't trade missions. These weren't acts of diplomacy. These were self-indulgent, taxpayer-funded bacchanals, and the more we learn, the worse it gets. Let's start in Thailand.
If you want more unfiltered royal truth, not the palace-approved version, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, are Beatrice and Eugenie breaking the cycle or repeating history? Stay tuned. The tea only gets hotter.
Prince Andrew hosted up to 40 women, yes, 40 in just 4 days at his hotel in Bangkok. That's not hearsay. That's corroborated. These weren't official meetings. These weren't diplomatic receptions. These were private, late-night visits escorted in discreetly, managed by aides who knew better than to ask questions, and silenced by a system that protected the prince at all costs. And this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Fast forward to Hong Kong, 2010, a trip that cost British taxpayers tens of thousands of pounds in flights, suites, and security. But behind the doors of his luxury hotel, the same disturbing behavior played out. Multiple women were reportedly brought to his suite, some described as escorts, some still unverified, but the stories match. The timeline fits, and the sense of royal entitlement is deafening. So we have to ask, how long did this go on? How many trips? How many women? How many taxpayer-funded hotel bills disguised as trade visits? And more importantly, how was this allowed? Because it wasn't just Andrew misbehaving. It was an entire apparatus of silence, from palace aides to diplomatic staff, who let it happen, who arranged travel, who handled logistics, who shielded him from scrutiny. People who either didn't dare say no or worse, didn't care. This wasn't a secret behind closed doors. This was an open secret, the kind whispered in embassy corridors, joked about by staffers, and nervously ignored by those too afraid to speak out. Because when it came to Prince Andrew, the rules didn't apply. He didn't just walk into rooms. He expected them to be cleared for him. He didn't just make demands. He issued orders to grown men, professionals, diplomats, like he was still a naval commander and they were his subordinates. He demanded women. He demanded privacy. And he expected zero accountability. And for years, he got exactly that. Because this is what unchecked power looks like. This is what generational privilege without consequences produces. A man so insulated by his birthright, by his title, by the gold-embroidered institution behind him, that he truly believed he could do anything. He could abuse his status as Britain's trade envoy to jet across the world, rack up expenses, enjoy private luxuries, and turn diplomatic tour into personal playgrounds. And no one would dare stop him. Until now, because the walls are finally closing in. The palace, under King Charles' reign, has stopped shielding. The titles are gone. The HRH status is stripped. The military honors revoked. Andrew isn't just being sidelined, he's being systematically erased from the public-facing royal narrative. And let's be clear, this didn't happen because of one interview or one scandal. It happened because of years of reports like this, a decades-long accumulation of disgrace, built on behavior that was not just reckless but rotten to the core. It's the price of monarchy without transparency, the consequence of a family allowed to police itself, and the cost is now being paid not just by Andrew, but by the entire royal institution. Because when you dig into Andrew's behavior, you're not just uncovering one man's fall. You're lifting the lid on a system that allowed it to go unchecked. What files remain sealed from those trade envoy years? What reports were never published? What did officials know and how high did it go? This is why people are demanding the release of archived travel logs, diplomatic memos, and internal palace correspondence from Andrew's tenure as trade envoy. The truth must come out, not just for the sake of reputation but for public accountability, because the British taxpayer funded this mess. Andrew's trips, some of which topped £90,000 per visit, were justified under the guise of boosting economic ties, promoting British business, serving the nation. But how many deals were actually secured? And how much of it was a smokescreen for private indulgence? The numbers are staggering, nearly £4 million spent on overseas travel during Andrew's time in the role. And now, as the stories leak, we are seeing what that money really bought. Not diplomacy, not economic leadership, but hotel suites, private dinners, and an alleged revolving door of women, coordinated under the guise of royal duty. It's not just immoral, it's a betrayal. A betrayal of the office, a betrayal of the public, and a betrayal of the very idea that royalty means service. And while the palace wants to move on, while Charles attempts to carve out a modern, slimmed-down monarchy, the damage Andrew has done cannot be so easily papered over. Because every new revelation chips away at the monarchy's moral authority. Every leak exposes the deep rot of unchecked privilege. And every unanswered question leaves the public more skeptical, more bitter, and more unwilling to support an institution that still, in 2025, exists largely on faith. Faith in their dignity, faith in their service, faith in their restraint. And Andrew has shattered that. He's turned royal duty into a punchline. He's dragged centuries of tradition through the dirt. And no matter how many royal press statements are released, no matter how many ceremonial titles are revoked, the stain is permanent. And the real danger, there may be more. There are still sealed files, still locked accounts, still witnesses and staff who haven't spoken. What if these Thailand and Hong Kong trips are only the beginning? What if the real scandal isn't what's already known but what's yet to be revealed? Because if this pattern extends deeper, if the palace knew more than it admitted, if funds were diverted, if Andrew's influence was used for personal or financial gain, then we're not just looking at a prince in disgrace. We're looking at an institutional failure. And that raises the final, most damning question of all. What else is the royal family hiding? Because if the Andrew scandal teaches us anything, it's that secrecy breeds corruption. And in a modern democracy, even the crown isn't above the truth. Not anymore. The public wants answers. The public deserves answers. And until every file is opened, every question answered, and every abuse accounted for, this scandal will hang over the monarchy like a dark, storm-filled cloud. Because it's not just about Andrew anymore. It's about the system that let him thrive. And unless that system is confronted, unless real reform replaces royal protection, this isn't the last scandal. It's just the loudest one yet. And it won't go quietly. Because here's the raw, uncomfortable truth no one inside the palace dares say aloud. Andrew was never the exception. He was the product. A product of generations of unchecked power. Of doors opened not by merit, but by blood. Of a culture where privilege was baked into every decision. Where arrogance was mistaken for leadership. And where loyalty to the crown always meant loyalty to the silence. For years, Prince Andrew operated in a fog of impunity. He was the spare, but with all the perks. No real responsibility, but all the access. The royal uniform without the weight of duty. He had diplomatic passports, armed protection, bottomless travel budgets, and the kind of influence that could bypass red tape in any global capital. And what did he do with it? He turned it into a playground. Thailand wasn't about British trade. Hong Kong wasn't about investment. These weren't missions of statecraft, they were indulgent, taxpayer-funded joyrides cloaked in royal legitimacy. Let's stop calling them allegations. These are patterns. Patterns confirmed by staffers, diplomats, insiders, former aides who, off the record, all paint the same picture. A man who moved through the world, as if the rules simply didn't apply. He demanded discretion. He expected protection. And he received both. Until now. Because the palace has lost control of the narrative. The dam has cracked. The leaks have become floods. And the royal PR machine, once the most polished on earth, now sputters out half-hearted statements that fail to contain the fury. You know why? Because the public has changed. Gone are the days when tabloid scandal could be buried with a handshake and a photo op. We live in a world where screenshots are forever, flight logs circulate on Reddit, and cover-ups crumble in hours. Andrew still seems to think he's living in 1998. The rest of us are here, in 2025, watching the walls close in. And those walls aren't just closing in on him. They're closing in on the institution that enabled him. The monarchy, for centuries, has operated on one simple assumption. That public respect would hold, no matter the behavior behind the gates. That if you polished the tiaras enough, if you showed up to the hospital ribbon cuttings, if you trotted out the pageantry once a year, people would keep clapping. Keep bowing. Keep believing. But not anymore. Not after Andrew. Not after a £4 million taxpayer tab for trade trips that looked more like private club crawls. Not after multiple witnesses and internal sources paint a portrait of a man using royal staff to escort women to his suite. Not after reports of a literal revolving door of women escorted in under diplomatic immunity, swept out before sunrise, all under the watchful eye of the firm. This isn't just unethical. It's criminally negligent at best, and morally bankrupt at worst. And yes, King Charles took action. He stripped Andrew's titles. He shut down his public appearances. He made it clear that there would be no return to royal life. But here's the thing. He did it after the damage was done. Years after Epstein. Years after the BBC interview. Years after the cover-ups. Years after the money had already been spent. The image already destroyed. And now, what's left? A monarchy grappling with a crisis of credibility. Because for every taxpayer who now asks, where did my money go? There are 1,000 more asking, what else don't we know? What files remain locked away? What other royal trips were misused? What other names are buried in those sealed envoy documents? Transparency isn't optional anymore. It's essential for survival. And make no mistake, this isn't about abolishing the monarchy. This is about saving it. Saving it from itself. Because if it doesn't confront its past, if it doesn't purge the rot, if it doesn't come clean fully, unapologetically, publicly, then this institution, already hanging by a thread in the eyes of a disillusioned public, will lose what little moral authority it has left. Because if Andrew a royal, a trade envoy, a man with armed guards and diplomatic powers could turn state business into personal pleasure and get away with it for decades, then what does that say about the system that let it happen? What does it say to the victims, to the taxpayers, to the citizens of the very countries he visited under a Union Jack? It says this: power still protects power. Privilege still buys silence. And unless we demand more, nothing will change. Because let's not forget, these weren't private trips. These were public duties, funded by the people, signed off by the state, branded with the royal seal. And while ordinary Brits were facing austerity, rising costs, and crumbling public services, Andrew was staying in £7,000 a night hotel suites in Bangkok, with security and staff turning a blind eye to the nightly parade of guests. He wasn't serving the nation. He was serving himself. And now that the veil has been lifted, there's no going back. The question now isn't just what did Andrew do? It's who else knew, who looked the other way, who signed the papers, who paid the bills, and how deep does this go? Because if there are sealed envoy files, open them. If there are internal audits, release them. If there are staff testimonies, make them public. The people deserve the truth. Not because of Andrew. He's finished. But because institutions can't reform if they refuse to admit the sickness within. This is a moment of reckoning. A moment where monarchy meets modern accountability. Where royal secrecy clashes with democratic expectation. Where the past refuses to stay buried no matter how many titles are revoked, how many press statements are issued, or how many royal biographies are sanitized. Prince Andrew's disgrace is more than a personal collapse. It's a mirror. A mirror held up to an outdated system clinging to tradition while the world demands transparency. And in that mirror, we see a hard truth. Royalty without responsibility is a relic. Power without accountability is a threat. And silence in the face of corruption, that's complicity. Andrew believed he could travel the world on our dime and leave no trace. But the trace is here. It's permanent. And it demands justice. Because this story isn't just about scandal. It's about the future of the monarchy, of public trust, of truth itself. And we are watching now more than ever. Because once the public sees the truth, once they really see it, there's no unseeing it. No polished portrait, no Buckingham balcony wave, no royal documentary will erase the image of Prince Andrew turning taxpayer-funded trips into personal playgrounds. There's no coming back from that. Not for him. And not, unless they're careful, for the monarchy either. What we're witnessing here is the final, brutal collision between privilege and consequence. For decades, Andrew Mountbatten, Windsor-styled as the Duke of York, was the living embodiment of royal impunity. He strutted through state dinners and international summits, expecting the red carpet not because of what he'd done, but because of who he was. But Andrew didn't walk with grace. He stomped through it like he owned the world. And that attitude, that sense of invincibility, is exactly why we are here. It's why there were no boundaries during those overseas trips. Why diplomatic protection was treated like a luxury service, why aides were too afraid or too complicit to step in when the guests started arriving at the hotel suites, one after another. It's why, even now, there are sealed files marked private, restricted, classified, tucked away in the same vaults where the palace keeps its darkest secrets. And it's why the public is furious. Because we paid for those trips. The British taxpayer shelled out millions on flights, security, motorcades, hotel penthouses, dinners, press officers, and official entertainment while Andrew allegedly turned trade missions into glorified bachelor holidays. What was promised? Deals, diplomacy, national representation. What did we get? Silk sheets, closed doors, and whispers from staffers afraid to speak up. And let's talk about those staffers, the invisible machine that surrounds every royal on the move. The private secretaries, the security detail, the logistics teams, the embassy personnel. People whose job was to serve the crown, and who found themselves time and time again silently navigating the minefield of Andrew's behavior. You think they didn't notice? They did. They always did. They noticed when the guest lists didn't match the trade itinerary. They noticed when the prince disappeared for hours, or when he demanded privacy clauses and off-the-books reservations. They noticed when the so-called visitors were ushered up to the suite but never officially logged. They saw the mess. And many of them, because this is the culture they worked in, kept their heads down and said nothing. Because when you work for royalty, speaking out can end your career. And for a long time, protecting the institution meant protecting him. But here's the kicker: in doing so, they protected no one. Not the monarchy, not the public, certainly not the people Andrew exploited for his pleasure. Now, the silence has shattered, and what's left behind is not just reputational ruin, it's institutional rot. Because Prince Andrew didn't act alone. No, he may have been the face, the swaggering figure stepping in and out of hotel lobbies, but this machine, it was built around him. A system designed to insulate, to obscure, to run interference when the questions got too sharp. So the rot isn't just in one man, it's in the structure that let him thrive. And unless that structure is dismantled, unless it's examined honestly, publicly, without royal varnish, then this story doesn't end with Andrew. It becomes a template, a precedent, a warning that power, left unchallenged, will always consume itself. So, the question is no longer, what did Andrew do? We know. The question now is, what did they let him get away with? And how far up the chain does the silence go? Because the palace may want to pretend this is over. That by stripping his titles, moving him into exile, pulling him from the balcony, and trooping the color, the job is done. But it's not. Not even close. Those actions are cosmetic. They are damage control. They are reaction, not reckoning. A reckoning means opening the files. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.